Are video games art? The answer, yes, unquestionably. But this of course requires a great deal of defense. So, I'm going to spend this entire video trying to convince you that video games are an art form that doesn't have to be enjoyed or experienced by everyone, but should at least be respected by everyone as an art form. But first, let's talk about some common perceptions of video games. Public perception. Something I hear a lot is that video games are toys. Well, in a sense, I suppose they are. The problem is when people belittle games as simply toys. Many of these same people come from families that go to the movies and hunt and fish. Is it really all that different? But you're just playing pretend. Dude, no one in the United States has needed to hunt to feed their family in like 100 years. You are also playing pretend. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but your hobby is not any more necessary or virtuous than mine. Your hobby is also usually more expensive. Consoles cost at most $500, and I never buy consoles at full price. Games cost at most $60, and I rarely buy them at full price. So, assuming I buy a new console every year, which I don't, assuming I buy 20 games at full price every year, which I don't, and assuming I purchase an annual Game Pass to play online or get extra features, the most I'm spending on my hobby a year is $1,800. Can you say the same? Also, my hobby doesn't take me away from my family for days at a time. If my wife needs me, she just comes to my office and interrupts my game. She doesn't have to wait for me to randomly reappear on the grid so that she can call or text me. I'm always within reach. I'm starting to see the appeal. Now, there are real genuine problems with video games. Video game addiction has been linked to depression and anxiety. Young people with autism and ADHD are especially vulnerable. Video games encourage sedentary lifestyles. But are these dangers really any different from binge watching Game of Thrones or the Great British Baking Show? How many times have you looked at your phone today? As with all things, moderation and proper supervision is the key. And while games are violent, and are increasingly becoming more realistic, there is no evidence that it's harming us. And again, it's not like there isn't violence in every other media we consume. Video games, like any other media, can produce bad, immoral, and unsafe content. But I think video games get an especially bad rap when it comes to these problems. Many people see games as, at best, massive wastes of time, and at worst, murder simulators. But I'm not going to try to challenge that idea. I'm going to use 4 games to illustrate that video games can be an imaginative and powerful art form, and should be respected as such. There are major spoilers ahead. 2007's Bioshock, complicated themes and online communities. Bioshock is a first-person shooter about a guy named Jack, whose plane crash lands in the ocean. He seeks shelter in a lighthouse, only to discover an underwater world called Rapture. In this world, an idealistic tycoon by the name of Andrew Ryan has attempted to create a society that is completely free of government oversight.
Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God.
Businessmen, artists, scientists, and philosophers are free to create whatever they want without the watchful eye of government regulation or religious moralizing. The game is a reductio ad absurdum critique of libertarianism and objectivism. I was 21 when the game came out, and a junior in college. I had just recently been exposed to the writings of Ayn Rand, of whom Andrew Ryan is clearly an illusion. Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead were fresh in my mind when this game blew up the video game world. Suddenly, as I played what I thought was just a game, I began to realize that the themes fit perfectly into the material I was reading in my literature, history, theology, and economics courses. As I struggled with understanding Ayn Rand's ideas and properly diagnosing its strengths and weaknesses, imagine my shock to discover that this video game had encapsulated one of the most coherent arguments against unfettered capitalism I'd ever seen. But it didn't stop there. The online discussion about the game was nearly as enlightening as the experience itself, as gamers rushed to defend and critique the game. This was the first time I really saw video games as a complete art form. Sure, I'd been playing games my entire life, and I'd had some pretty emotional experiences with these games. But this was the first time I saw video games as capable of high-minded philosophy and discussion. But it turns out, this was only the beginning. 2013's The Last of Us, relationship building and storytelling. 6 years later, I was married, I had just started teaching in public schools, and a game came out that changed my life, The Last of Us. First, let me say that The Last of Us might be the most violent game I have ever played. It's not particularly gory, or at least not more gory than other games, The problem with The Last of Us is proximity. While most games require to shoot things, keeping the violence at a distance, the violence in The Last of Us is always right in front of your face. It's intimate. It's not happening over there, it's happening right in front of you. Enemies plead for mercy, skulls crack wide open, men you put in chokeholds realistically slap at you in a gut-wrenchingly authentic way. This game does not allow you to enjoy the violence. Every kill makes you feel enormous guilt. And don't even get me started on the sequel, which is basically just a guilt simulator. But all of this violence has a purpose. The setting of The Last of Us is that of a post-apocalyptic zombie world, where a girl, Ellie, is immune to the outbreak and her caretaker, Joel, is tasked with getting her to a group called the Fireflies so that they can produce a vaccine and save humanity. Pretty typical video game stuff. But the game is made great by the relationship developed between the two main characters. It's superbly written and perfectly acted by Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson.
Your fellow hunters do this?
Cute. And no, my money's on the military.
Why would they mow down all these people?
You can't let everyone in.
So they killed them?
And dead people don't get infected.
The game explores what it's like to lose loved ones, what it's like to allow yourself to be vulnerable by growing close to people, and what it's like to do terrible, violent things for the people you love. And at the end of the game, it even asks the player what they are prepared to do to keep those relationships intact. HBO is producing a series based on The Last of Us, and I hope that people that don't play video games finally get an opportunity to fall in love with Ellie and Joel and experience their profound father-daughter relationship. 2017's Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Empathy and metaphor. Games can put you in the shoes of a protagonist like in no other media. Immersion is the bread and butter of video games, and one of the best examples of this is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. The protagonist, Senua, suffers from serious psychosis and schizophrenia. She hears voices and believes a rot is slowly killing her. The game implements a new technique called 3D sound and is best experienced with a headset. The voices in Senua's head never stop throughout the game, and the game attempts to simulate the conditions of schizophrenia.
You can't always trust your eyes.
This, of course, is not a complete picture of what it's like to be schizophrenic, but only playing for a couple of hours can give you real insight into what it's like to hear voices all the time. It's a masterclass in empathy and has gone a long way toward removing the stigma attached to mental disease. 2013, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, using gameplay as storytelling. But the ultimate example of storytelling in video games is a hidden indie gem. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons is one of those games that could easily be written off as cartoony or childish. Even many gamers didn't get around to playing this game as they thought it was just some indie niche. But inside this unassuming tale is one of the most heartbreaking experiences I've ever had. Brothers tells the story of two brothers, the older brother Naya and the younger brother Nai. The game opens with Nai mourning his mother at her grave. The game cleverly hides a tutorial in the opening level as the two brothers attempt to carry their very sick father to the doctor. The two brothers are controlled with different joysticks. The older brother is controlled with the left joystick, the younger brother with the right joystick. The older brother performs actions with the left trigger, the younger brother with the right trigger. This is extremely important. It's revealed that the only way to save their father is to retrieve water from the Tree of Life. So the two brothers embark on a journey and you quickly become acclimated to the gameplay. Controlling the two brothers quickly becomes the most natural thing in the world, and each brother has specific abilities. Naya is bigger and stronger, but slower and can't fit into certain places. Naya is smaller and weaker, but faster and can fit into small places. Naya can swim, Naya can't. The two brothers take a long journey together, and you get better and better at solving puzzles and controlling the boys independently of each other with separate joysticks. And then, tragedy strikes. Toward the end of the game, Naya is killed. Nai is forced to bury his brother, and you feel it. I mean, you really feel it. I mean, you literally feel it. You've gotten used to using the joysticks independently to control the brothers, and now suddenly, half of the controller is completely useless. It's like someone broke your controller in half or chopped your left hand off. It's the most profound sense of empathy I have ever experienced to this day. You spend the rest of the game using only the right side of the controller, and it just feels wrong. It feels like a part of you is missing. Finally, with the cure for your father in hand, you almost arrive home, when suddenly a storm strikes and you have to swim to safety. Remember, Naid can't swim, but he has to. So you pull the right trigger and watch as Naid helplessly swims against the current. This continues indefinitely until you realize that you're clearly missing something. Something has to happen. So in almost desperate frustration, you begin pressing other buttons. Buttons you haven't used for the entire game. A, X, B, the home button. Nothing does the trick. Until finally, you land on the left trigger, the button you used to control the older brother. And when you pull the trigger, Naid finds the strength to swim ashore. The usefulness of the left side of the controller is restored to you, and you experience a rush of relief. This feeling represents Naid's healing, his acceptance of his brother's death, and that he is even able to draw strength from his memory. This game is important, not because it is pretty and not because it tells a powerful narrative. It is important because this is an experience that cannot be had in any other media. Bioshock, The Last of Us, maybe even Hellblade are experiences that, while much would have been lost, would have been totally legitimate experiences as films or novels. But not Brothers. This game only works as a game. You cannot experience what this game has to offer in any other media because it literally uses the gameplay to tell its story, to create empathy. And if this isn't art, what is? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Alien Isolation is both terrifying and feminist. Mass Effect is a sprawling, epic exercise in moral ambiguity. The most recent Spider-Man is a heartbreaking tale about the loss of loved ones. God of War is about fatherhood. Red Dead Redemption 2 is about self-sacrifice. Braid is about owning up to your mistakes. I could go on and on. Not only are video games art, they might be the greatest art form ever created. They are the culmination of centuries of human narrative, visual storytelling, sound design, actor portrayals, computer graphics, and interactive media. Video games are capable of being the ultimate medium for practicing empathy. And what is art, if not the exercise of empathy?